Greetings and salutations, viewers. Welcome to another episode of Game Break. I am Charles, coming to you today with another episode of World End Economica Episode 2. Last time round, we made it all the way over to our new digs and caught up with Eleanor and found out who the staff is going to be in all its weirdness. So we have Eleanor, we have Chris, we have basically a butler type dude, and then a little gopher. So how about we dive in and see where things go from here. And seeing as this game is still borked, we gotta pop in here, like a so, and then do a quick load. Exactly. Jeremy Botsman is one of the three heads of Avalon. At 26, he acts as both the CIO and CTO for this company, whose profits reach into the high 40 billions, as to be expected on the lunar surface, you could say. Chief Investment Officer and Chief Technology Officer. Anyone able to pursue him would certainly have to perform magnificently in the financial sector. For the last 2 years since the start of the investment boom, everyone has been frantic to find him, but none have been able to discover his whereabouts. Your phone was no longer reachable. The brokerage account you were using had been closed, and all records were lost from the company merger. I heard from Chris that I was a missing person. The world is mysterious like that. Last year, when I chanced upon meeting Chris, I thought it the will of God when I learned of Haru. You were even praying at Rise's church? Yes, the lunar surface lacks proper churches, so it was a godsend. Madame, given the time, should you not move to the topic at hand? Yeah, 100,000 mools annually. Also entitled to 20% of the collective exchange profits. However, when in a deficit, no bonus will be paid out. It's quite the ideal monetary incentive, but... I stopped abruptly and looked over at Eleanor. She tilted her head to the side and smiled, then immediately said, "You are curious as to my personal objective." Eleanor was the leader here. If Eleanor had a goal, then everyone below her would have taken that to heart. The only thing I could do was make money, and I doubted I could help if she was trying to reclaim her company or rebuild it from scratch. You need not worry about that at all. If I could just have you perform to invest and raise capital, then my objective will be fulfilled naturally. Understood. Are there any other points which concern you? The way she asked almost had me chuckling. However, there were a few points of concern in this contract that kept me from nodding my head yes. I'd like to know the company's structure. You are free to come and go as you please. Of course, I do not mind if you reside here either. However, you'd be sleeping under your desk. It's not that bad, actually. Marco didn't seem to be joking as he said that with a friendly smile. It did seem that they did not want to force a sudden change in someone's lifestyle. I will, however, establish an upper limit on trading amounts. I will decide in each case whether or not to sanction amounts that surpass them. Is that understood? Le Goff said that in a way that allowed no argument. Yeah. Also, which types of money-making methods will I be using? Eleanor answered this question. You do things other than stocks as well? No, just confirming. I'll probably only be doing stocks. I'm rather familiar with them. I feel that is best. familiar with the stock exchange. But that was 4 years ago. I'm not sure I'd be useful in this day and age. I was concerned, but I had just as much feeling of anticipation as I did worry. I felt Marco's gaze looking upon me as I thought that. Those eyes, as if he were looking up at a sports star he idolized. I raised up the corners of my mouth with my fingers into a shape of a smile. Marco's shoulders shot up, but his mouth was twitching as if questions would start streaming out at any moment.
Is something the matter?
Not at all. So how long is the probation period?
What if I were to say until the end of today?
Eleanor answered without hesitation. She somewhat resembled Riza in that sense. I could see in her eyes that she might not be a frail damsel. I shrugged my shoulders and sighed.
1 month for now.
I pray it's swift. Thus, albeit temporarily, I began my time as a member of Schweitzer Investing.
Oh boy. Well then, there is business I must attend to. If there is anything you need, please refer to either Le Goff or Marco.
Okay.
You wouldn't perform a large transaction on your first day during your probation period, though, would you?
Terra Standard Time right now would mean the Asian exchange, if that is what you wish. Eleanor didn't seem to have been expecting such a retort, as she wore a mischievous grin. She then closed her eyes.
Seems that a 23 dinner would be just fine for you, Haru.
23?
If you show fine gains, then let us all go.
Madame, your vehicle awaits. Le Goff spoke as he glanced at his portfolio portable terminal. Eleanor nodded in affirmation and left the room. I felt like there was a sudden drop in the pressure in the room as she left. That was probably what you would call her presence.
She was talking about an expensive restaurant.
I stared blankly at the door Eleanor had left through as Marco suddenly spoke up. Huh?
23.
Oh.
There's a place in New York called 21, you see.
That popular place the guys on Wall Street go to, so there's one on the moon. When I muttered that, Marco's eyes suddenly sparkled.
You know of it?
Well, yeah. It comes up every so often in books. Of course, I've never been there myself.
Oh, Haru is like that too. That makes me happy.
For a moment, I didn't know what he meant by that, but I had a good idea as I looked at Marco, who would have been wagging his tail like a puppy, if he had one. A flat cap and light brown vest, a plaid shirt and dark brown pants with loafers. I shrugged and decided to ask, "Isn't that outfit you're wearing from Terra?"
Oh,
I was a little offended by Terra favoring Terran tramps, and even more so by lunar punks who did the same, but when it was this thorough, I found it rather adorable.
American immigrants laugh at me and take pictures.
I won't comment on people's tastes, but I'm not like that. I just happen to know about 21.
What?
I just like the history and stories about finance.
But you know about this outfit and what it means.
Well, I'd say I think I know more about it than Chris. I turned my attention over towards Chris, who was listening into our conversation absent-mindedly. She gave a nervous little jolt.
Chris is much more of a lunar punk than I am.
I get what you're trying to say.
What is it?
It's nothing. This guy is tyrannized, or rather, he's retrofied. Marco appeared displeased with that and showed it by adjusting his flat cap with both hands, just like a kid out of an old movie. More importantly, what should I be doing first?
There are terminals if you need them.
As soon as we moved to a topic she understood, Chris jumped right in. It's not that. I haven't looked at the market in 4 years.
If you want the Schrodinger Street Journal, we have a paid subscription, so you can see the backlog for a few years.
Marco replied as he opened his terminal at what was probably his desk. On top of that desk was a desktop clock and letter opener, also a pen stand and inkwell. I felt that he had been influenced by Le Goff, but I also thought he was trying too hard. Where's the Daily Post?
We have it, but it's general news.
Businessmen should only be reading business newspapers. When I said that, Marco blinked and nodded as if he'd had an epiphany. I felt like I was looking at myself from 4 years ago as Marco punched a few keys on his terminal, then gave me the chair.
You can see up to 10 years ago.
Thanks. When I sat in Marco's chair, he stared intently at the terminal from one side. He did this so as not to miss a single thing I did. But I wasn't thinking of Marco at all at the moment. I took a deep breath in and let it out. I felt a familiar tension when it came to returning to the investing sector. After that, the only thing I did was read over the headlines for each week. Those headlines were, of course, those which the Lunarians felt were important, and were meant to be uplifting. Of course, what happened in the 6th Outer District, where we were, wasn't even mentioned. After the commotion reached a breaking point, it just became a tiny article about the problems with the influx of immigrants. It came up during the presidential election, but since no one really liked the government, the whole affair was forgotten. The topics were in a loop. Development, influx of immigrants, problems arise. Development, influx of immigrants, problems arise. Other popular topics regarding the stability of the lunar government versus Chares included a peculiar murder case, an accident on the space elevator, and the health problems of people returning to Terra after a long stay on the moon. A certain research institute reported findings that the muscles of elderly people who'd spent long periods in low gravity couldn't cope with life on Terra. That actually would make sense, and it stays in line with what we know so far of extended exposure to low gravity and zero gravity. In particular, there were respiratory issues, which one report said could be fatal. Since there were few elderly people spending long periods on the moon, and there were no incidents of such deaths on Terra, the commotion ended after a while. At that time, I probably thought nothing of it. The energy crisis began receiving coverage around last year, and Avalon's name appeared around them. Avalon was founded 10 years ago, seeming to slip through the gaps of regulations as an independent energy company. Their corporate history simply said that it became larger with buyouts and payouts, finally becoming a David to Emerald Industries' Goliath. Half of the top headlines last year covered Jeremy Botsman, who was young even by the lunar surfaces standards, being employed as Avalon's CIO and CTO, which had a profits of over $30 billion. According to Eleanor, their profits were already over $40 billion. At that point, the Avalon brand was showing the highest yields on the stock exchange. It was a brand that made everyone happy, with its high yields begetting high yields. Then after that, most of the headline articles were about the booming stock exchange. The people not participating? Were they fools? Or were the fools the guys engrossed in it? There were many top headlines with the president and bank representatives in talks regarding market regulations. There was the completion ceremony of the third lunar city and an announcement. Start of the fourth lunar city. An article stating that there were over 500,000 residential houses. Right after that, a crisis with lower income residences and the first demonstrations ever on the lunar surface with the slogan, "Give us homes." But that died down quickly, as the next article was about someone residing on the lunar surface having the highest salary of all of humanity at a record-breaking $3.2 billion. It may be relevant, as the Pope of the Catholic Church on Terra had criticized the moon as a land of greed in an encyclical. Next, the government announced prosperity that was unprecedented as far back as statistics were kept. Rash of immigration, increased poverty, cabinet meeting to revise the taxation system, then the revision taken into effect, and from last month, a caption saying that the lunar surface had more wealthy people than anywhere on Terra. I mostly just read the headlines and looked at the photos without reading much of the story itself, so 10 years worth of the reading didn't take long. The gravity on the lunar surface was 1/6 that of Terra, so it was said that things on the moon proceeded at 6 times the speed of Terra. When all I did was read the headlines, it did feel that way. Given the breakneck speed at which the lunar surface moved, uncovering welfare institution application frauds in a government office really did seem pointless and futile. This was a relatively serious paper, so the more sensational ones would likely be making the whole thing into a spectacle for people to squabble over. Not to mention that if the Schrödinger Street Journal did the same thing, it'd just cause eye irritation. In any case, it really wasn't hard to pick up the gist of the market, even though I'd stayed out for so long. For the past 4 years, I'd been living with my head buried in the sand. I picked up some information, and now it was obvious how the stock exchange was doing from how grand these newspaper headlines were. If I were to use a phrase from Marco's lexicon, I'd say, "Welcome to the Golden Age."
Whew. So this is the way to do it. That was 100 times more interesting than history class in school.
It seemed that this weird retrofied boy was able to pick up on what I was doing rather quickly.
Be objective is Eleanor's favorite saying.
Only if you're able to do this while you're neck deep in the market.
Is it difficult?
It was. The further down I delved, the narrower my sight became. Then, with my needle-wide vision in that whirling situation, I didn't even question the validity of the 1 or 2 things I thought up and acted on. Presence of mind, serene with clarity. When I returned home, my usually tight-lipped father hit me with those words instead of his fist. I probably wouldn't be able to understand what that meant, even if I spent my entire life trying. Well, one swallow does not a summer make, or one hot day, for that matter.
Huh?
It all depends on your dedication. I'm not familiar with either swallows or summer, though. It's just that I don't want to mess up again like I did in the past. That's my only concern. I could tell that Chris was feeling uneasy watching Marco innocently ask me questions as I answered them. Even still, I continued to flick smoothly through the articles on the terminal with my right hand.
Haru, why did you quit investing?
Oh boy. He blurted it out as soon as it came to him. I believe it's a privilege of being young to be filled with curiosity. When I pushed up the corners of my mouth into a grin, Marco seemed to grasp in revelation.
Sorry.
I'll tell you about it when I'm feeling more inclined. I let Chris see me shrugging my shoulders as she looked in my direction. worried by my words. "Oh yeah, Chris."
Yes?
Chris was looking over at me, jolted as straight as I called at her. "I'd like to see your investment data."
What?
Chris's blue eyes behind her round glasses became even rounder.
Well... It's a bit embarrassing, actually.
Chris shrunk down as she looked up at me. This made me pretty sure she wasn't joking. Only a fellow investor could understand how embarrassing it is to show someone else your investment data. However, Chris was using the program Hagana created, so I could use it as a basis for my investing choices. So it was necessary that I see it. "I heard that you had good results. I want to see how my choices from back then held up in today's market." Chris looked away. The look on her face said she wanted to say no. If it's a secret, then that's fine.
No, okay.
"I'd like you to put the transaction records here." Saying that, I took out my personal terminal from work out of my bag and handed it over to Chris. The reason I said it so businesslike was because I understood why she was being so hesitant. It's strange, but showing someone your stock transaction portfolio was quite embarrassing. Unless you're an infallible genius, then undoubtedly you'd have mistakes here and there. Also, the more earnestly one invested, the less of a simple mistake it became. Normally, you buy stock when you believe your judgment is correct, so those mistakes were proof your judgment was wrong. Also, you'd look back more than once and clutch your head wondering how you made that mistake. Fooled by your greed and bought too much, ruled by your fears and sold too much, those were all too common. In other words, it was an expression of all your feelings and skills. While the data was being transmitted wirelessly, she held her hands between her legs and squirmed about. That data was a record of the feelings and ideas Chris had, what mistakes she made, what results of her choices. When Barton looked over my transaction history, he said, "They were good transactions. I could feel your determination in them." I understood quite well the people who got angry when someone said that stock trading was a gamble. It wasn't a problem with the statistical probability of stocks. You tried to outwit others with your own expectations. It was a challenge.
Please don't laugh.
Chris said that as the data transfer finished. "You're looking more embarrassed than if I'd asked to see your panties." "I see you're still blunt and awkward as ever, Haru." I shrugged my shoulders at Chris, who was now understandably beet red, and then looked at Marco beside me.
Is Chris wearing embarrassing panties? No, I'm not.
Oh, that was high-pitched. Marco was quick on the uptake. I showed I was laughing by jostling my shoulders up and down in place of my unmoving face. Chris pouted, turning away, and Marco gave me a wide, toothy laugh. As we were doing this, the door opened and Lagoff returned.
Oh boy, it has become quite lively.
From his manner and outfit, it sounded like scorn, but it seemed as if he meant no ill will.
However, as the Chief Executive Ethics Officer, I cannot overlook sexual harassment.
Oh, so he overheard that, did he?
Oh boy.
It was a perfectly reasonable concern, but his all-too-serious behavior made the forgotten rebel inside me from 4 years ago rear his head. I thought it was important information, in case I were to invest in an underwear manufacturer.
Did I not mention that from the start?
Mention what?
I won't allow you to invest in companies dealing in dangerous weapons.
I was dumbfounded. Legoff flicked back his silver hair and clapped his hands together after returning quickly to his stoic expression.
Marco, let's stop laughing. Have you completed your duties? No. Madame has exceptional expectations for you. Do not disappoint. Okay.
He straightened up and responded right away. Then he urged me to stand up as if he were saying, well, that's how it goes. Of course, I followed along since it was his chair. Marco then pulled out 2 more terminals from the drawer and turned them on.
What will you both be having?
What?
No, going home.
Chris answered almost immediately. Legoff nodded and Chris closed her terminal.
Shall we go to the church?
Chris invited me along as Legoff was on the phone placing an order for delivery. Eating, then working even more at this hour. It wasn't that uncommon on the lunar surface, and there were probably few places that exist which surpassed Schrödinger Street when it came to overworking. Except this was very different from work at the government agency, and neither Marco nor Legoff appeared disturbed by it. This was somewhat promising, which made me feel a bit lighthearted.
What is it?
After saying goodbyes and leaving the room, Chris asked that as we walked down the dim corridor. Nothing at all. Chris seemed displeased with my evasiveness when I answered with that, but it only lasted up until I took out my terminal. Are
you really going to look at that?
She was talking about her transaction records. You're really bad at giving up. We originally made this program, right? If there are mistakes, then it's me who should be embarrassed.
Well, that's true, it's just...
I won't be surprised at how audacious you've been, either.
Jeez.
Smooth talker as always. Chris pushed both of her hands against her shaggy blonde hair as if holding on to it. When we got onto the elevator, she spoke in a small voice next to me as the data loaded.
But it could be really shocking. That's everything Miss Hagana and you had put together.
When I looked down at Chris, who was at my left side, she looked up at me.
So, to make sure you don't have an episode...
Saying that, she wrapped her arm lightly around my arm that held my crutch. She turned to the side and looked down. Her ears were red to the tips. That's why she was holding back. She didn't want me to have an episode. Chris said that she wanted to live however she wants. It could just be that she hates how she was such a late bloomer. Or it could be that she just doesn't mind that I still can't forget about Hagana. Whatever it may be, I believe she has the courage. I tried not to sigh as I cleared my throat. Being as discreet as possible, I said, "Hey."
Yes?
My hands are full, so could you press the keys? I turned the terminal towards Chris, and she used her free hand, the one not wrapped around my left hand, and pressed the buttons timidly. And we'll have to see how that all plays out next time. So, we seem to have our marching orders, and we seem to have an idea of what we're going to do from here, and how we're theoretically going to do it. Next time round, maybe we'll actually do some. But until then, as always, go be creative. Go enjoy some stories that other people have created. Go create some stories of your own and share them with all of us so we can all have some fun. And I'll see you all next time.